SoulDisco exclusive. Unheard, unreleased, untold stories behind the music.
Well, mother was a very dominating person. As you read in the book, it was a lot of religion, but I was always the one that would question everything. I stayed in trouble for asking questions. And there was always, in my life, there was never really a stable male figure in the family. I had a stepfather that was Christopher Bell, and he was one of those, truck drivers that drove trucks across the country back in the day. And he was, I was named after him, and I actually took his last name, even though my father, who I never met, which is Paul Reeves Johnson. I never met him. But Chris was there most of the time for us. And I had two brothers and sisters, half brothers and sisters, Rose and Joseph. And for us, as a child, I remember the basic things were, we did our own gardening, we had a lot of chickens, and we had to keep the chickens up. We had to plant gardens. Every year we used to plant gardens. And my mother was a part-time nurse, and she was supposedly a spiritual leader for a lot of people. People would come to the house when we were kids, and mostly Caucasians would come to the house. And my mother would sit with them, and they'd sit around a big table, and they would have things called seances. And that's where you call the dead people up. And I was always, even as a kid, I thought that was insane. Because, you're thinking about, you start talking about death and people coming back from the dead, this wasn't cool with us as kids. But there were always a lot of children around, because mother would also be a foster parent for a short period of time. So we had people coming in and out of the house quite a bit. It was more like it wasn't a boarding house. It was more like you could kind of call it a boarding house, because you would never know who was going to be there. In the middle of the night, mother would come in, and she would have someone there, bring someone with her, maybe a family of 2 or 3, or a mother with her children. Most of the people that came, as I said, were Caucasians. A few African Americans, was very, 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 very rare. And through all of this, there would be these seances. They'd sit around a table, and she'd make us kids sit there too, myself and my sister Lynn. Joseph was much younger. And we'd have to sit there at the table when they were going through all these changes, and close your eyes and hold hands and call the spirit up, and this is your great, and I was sitting there as a kid, even back then, I was saying, this is insane. I wasn't saying that, it was just, I didn't want to be there. So I stayed in trouble because I would always say something. But we had a very colorful life as kids, the people that we met, the children that would come in and out of our lives. some of them which are still, we are still connected today, that call me their brother, because that's what was prescribed, the way the mother ruled with an iron hand. She was a very difficult person in terms of discipline, believing in, believing in the hereafter. I would always question this, even to this day. You know, I have a certain amount of skepticism. People get caught up in religion, and it can be the thing that can destroy you if you don't understand what's going on. As an adult, and I see, just through my book, I see the things that it did to me. Just trying to sit here and explain my life is really, there's too many places to start, too many things to talk about, too many things to try to clarify. We had all 7 of us kids had a different kind of life. The younger children, my younger brothers, the Jameses, it's very rare that I talked to either of my younger 2 brothers. One passed away. That was CJ, he passed away. But my brother Albert and Keola, because I went in the service when they were babies. So I didn't really have a good connection with them. I did and I didn't. Because I was not very fond of their father, who was James. That's where Chris James comes from. I can remember very vividly going to school on a Monday, and I was Bell. And then by the end of the week, they had gone and changed my name from Bell to James. That's how my mother ruled everything. She had a lot of connections down in the city of Oakland. She had a lot of connections with the government. So that was it. My name was changed. And I never really liked Caesar. And back in the day, homosexuality back then was really taboo. I mean, it was like you're going straight to hell. And Caesar was gay. I didn't know this because, you know, we didn't hear what was happening. Not that it mattered, but at the same time, me as a young African American would see him do different things that most men wouldn't do, you know. He shaved with this magic shave that smelled to high heaven. And he had a great voice, could cook wonderful, but there was something that we weren't just told about. And you don't think, I think I put it in the book, but you don't think, it's like my mother would be making love to him in the front bedroom, and the kids, we were around. And I remember when Caesar came to the house, these people, and again, I put this in my book, these people came to the house like on a Tuesday morning, and they brought Caesar and a big potbelly stove full of silver dollars. This was the pay for my mother to change him from being gay into being a man. And her thing was to, I know it sounds crazy, her thing was to, you know, I guess for a better term, nowadays people think differently, sexually make him change his thought process, which he didn't do, you know. He didn't like me at all because me, I was looking at him, you know, I'm a kid, I'm like 9, 10 years old. And I'm seeing this guy come in, and for years, Chris Bell was there, and other men that mother would see were there, totally different than him. And he came in with this very effeminate way of acting, more, and it was always women in my house, Always. My grandmother, my Aunt Baby, my Aunt Stella, my Aunt Tilly, they all women. He fit in with the women more than he did with myself and my brother, Joseph. I found out years later that he had actually molested Joseph. And I didn't find this out until years and years later. So most of the time, it's very difficult for me to remember all the madness. That's one of the reasons that I wrote my book. And I didn't really write it to be published. I was writing because I was going to a psychiatrist because I needed to get some answers just for myself. And hence the book. Because the people who read it said, man, you need to put this down on paper, you know. So I did. Oh, as children, that was a part of our life. You get up in the morning, you wash your hands, you go and you eat breakfast, you say prayers, and then you sing before we go to school. So I started singing, I can remember maybe 6 or 7. I remember very vividly. About 6 or 7 years old. So we started very, very early. It's in the book. We had a band, like a mother would play piano. And my sister Lynn would play there's a can. You ever see Folgers coffee? Well, I'm in Germany. There's a can, it's a red can, it says Folgers on it. And it contained coffee grounds to make coffee in the morning. And this was my sister's drum. And it's in the book. Mine was a big tub. And Lynn would play and sing. All of us could sing. All of the kids could sing. I was the best. You know, for me, it was a natural thing to sing. I used to. My whole thing is, and people can say I still do that today, I was singing in do floors. Back then I would do floors on my hands and knees. You know, the house stayed immaculately clean. And I would sing. And first I'd mop it. Then after I finished mopping, we had hardwood floors in some places. Then I would wax the floors. And I'd sing through the whole process, and I could get through doing whatever I was going to do as a child. I could do the whole floor, but I'd sing my way through it. So I've been singing. I would say I started singing maybe 5 or 6 years old. And my first contest was I was about 12, and I got second place, and that's when I knew I could sing. Yeah, the Army did. I wanted to get away from home. I wanted to get away from my mother, you know, because I would work and do yards and deliver papers, but I never could keep any of the money. My mother would take it all. And even when I went in the service, I didn't pass the test the first time. And I don't know how she did it. The mother went down to the Army place. Because when I came back home, I said I didn't pass the test. She said, okay, so she went down. I don't know what she said or who she talked to. I went down the next day or the next week, and they signed me up as soon as I walked in the door. To this day, I don't know what she said. But there was a whole thing going on because she had put a life insurance policy on me, and I was doing Vietnam. So I know that she put a life insurance policy on because she didn't expect me to come back. That sounds crazy, but why would you put a life insurance policy on somebody, you know? But I sang my way through the Army. I didn't go nowhere near Vietnam. That was not even the company that I was with, over here in Stuttgart, they shipped everybody out but a handful of us, and I was one of the handful. I didn't go AWOL. It's just when they left, I went in another direction. I went and saw Margaret. But I realized that my mother's plan was to have something happen to me so she could collect. Mother was really into money. I remember the times when we were sitting at the house and people would come and they'd bring her, I mean, I don't know how much, but it would be like stacks of money like this that these people would set on the table for my mother. And all our lives, this would happen, where people would come over and she would do a reading for them and they would give her, I remember some of the, there's one lady used to come, her name was Mrs. Helmke. She was like from over in this part of the world, but she lived in the States. And she'd come once or twice a month and bring my mother a stack of money. It might have been just one, but I mean, I'm a kid. I don't know what it is. All I know is they'd sit around the table and pass my mother this money. And one of the things that mother always told us, I'm not going to give you guys anything. You better make it on your own. Which is kind of weird, but that's how she was. Well, back in the day, my grandmother also, they would, what we call straighten my hair, because I had naturally super curly hair. And so they would straighten my hair in the morning and be straight as yours, you know. It looks, I mean, I'm a kid, I'm doing what they tell me to do. I'm going to school like this. I get to school and it would rain, and then my hair would go back to its natural state. It was a big thing with hair back in the day. It was so personally traumatic that as I got older, they started coming out with all kinds of, which they have nowadays, hair relaxers. And you got people that have stuff to make the hair curly now. But back then, that was a sin to have, not a sin, but it was just not cool to have really what they called nappy hair. And as African Americans, back then, it was all about how you looked, all about the clothes that you wore. And because we were poor, and we really weren't poor, but we lived really poor. Like I said, we would come every year, there would be it's in the book, every year there'd be a basket of clothes on the front porch from the kids that went to school with me. So I'd have to go back to school, which I put it in, I have to go back to school with a shirt that you wore the year before. You know, so these things that happen, it makes you have thick skin, because when you get to school and little Johnny's over there and say, oh man, that's a shirt I had last week. How do you think that did? What kind of effect does that have on a child? So you either accept that or you lose. And eventually, after a certain period of time where these things were happening, I just pushed it aside. It didn't, and it was a lot about color, who was darker, who was lighter. Those things stay with you all your life. Like myself and my younger sister, you know, we're cordial, but we don't get along because she was considered prettier because she was fair-skinned. I was considered ugly because I was dark-skinned. Things like this within the family. And this is not nothing new. This went on not just with our family, but with a lot of black families. And these things, I believe, came just from the way America has been in general. You know, how, and you can see it, how color has a lot to do, or did have a lot to do. It doesn't like today, it's not the same. But back in the day, you know, you're dark, you go to the back. You're fair-skinned or you're lighter, you know, don't marry a dark person, because if you marry a dark person, you're going to have ugly, dark children. This was just a normal way of, you know, how people from my era were brought up, because the way society is in general, the way we have been perceived. So it's not the same nowadays. it was racism within the family itself. We lived in Oakland, and in Oakland back then, there were more, there may be, say there was 250 students in the school. Only 50 of us were black. But there was no busing for us. It wasn't like it was down south. But in a way it was. As I said, if you're fair-skinned, you're gonna get an even break. If you're dark-skinned, you better make sure you better have something going for you, or you're gonna have problems. But this is back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And that's what's happening all over the place. It happened in California in a different way. It wasn't like it was in Mississippi where people are gonna come to your house, pull you out, and kill. It wasn't like that, like they were doing down south. But it was psychologically just the same. Well, when I first went to Germany, for me, it was like eureka, because everybody liked me. It's not a problem. All the clubs that we played in were all German people. For me, I just came into paradise, because coming from California and not being able to, even though there was not racism like it was down south, you could see there was a line. You know, it wasn't where you can't look at a white woman or nothing like that. It was just, you stay over here where you belong. But it wasn't like it was down south. So when I came to Germany, everybody liked me. The women, I was like, I was in heaven. I'm saying, here I am, 18 years old, in another country where 90% of the people are Caucasian, at least in color. And they were talking to me, and the girls were talking to me. I'm saying, look, I'm never leaving. So it was it wasn't just so much a culture shock as it was almost relief for me. It changed my whole perspective on who I wanted and what I wanted, and keeping in mind that the things that I heard from my grandmother, who was very fair-skinned. She was an Indian. You never marry anybody dark, never marry anybody with nappy hair, and you hear all these things. And so no matter what, they're ingrained in your mind. So coming to Germany, or going to Germany, for me was life-changing, because I felt I wasn't worried about color. I was more worried about which girl I could take out the next day or that evening after playing at a gig. So for me, it changed my perspective. Although I didn't think about, this is Germany, this is not Salt Lake City or Alabama or Mississippi. You can't do the same there. I remember when I first got in the service, I went to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. And I had a partner who was a white guy. And I can't remember his name. But I said, come on, man, let's go have a beer. So we got in the bus that takes you to town from the Army base, went into the city, got off the bus, me and my partner, walked into this bar, and the guy said the magic words, well, we don't serve niggas in here. And that's the first time in my life I ever heard that. Now, you gotta remember, I'm 18 years old, and I'm from Oakland. I never heard that in Oakland. Never saw any racism in Oakland. So I'm looking at him, me and my partner said, what? And he said, you can't go over across the tracks, and you get your ass on the other side of the tracks. That was a really wake-up call for me. I'm saying, oh man, this. But because no one took the time to say, okay, Olin, here's what's going on. This. It was all hoodoo and crazy stuff that my mother and my grandmother and my aunts were saying. They weren't saying the things to prepare me for real life. So I had to learn a lot of things on my own. That was one that really was a shocker for me because, I mean, I'm from Oakland, California. Everybody goes to school together, you know. What my mother didn't do is prepare any of her children for real life. It was all go to church and seances and hoodoo and blah, and you know, and I was always the one saying, this is not making no sense to me. But nobody sat us down and said, look, this is what you do, this is what you do. She didn't prepare us, and she prepared us for keeping the house clean, keeping food in your mouth, but she never prepared us educationally, even though she was really smart and her two sisters were also, one of my aunts ended up being a principal of a school. Mother never did homework with us. We had to figure this shit out on our own. She did us a lot of injustice because she didn't prepare us for real life. When you talk about seances and hoodoo, and you talk about the Jim Jones in the world, and it's lucky that we didn't get caught up in that. But I had long since left. But we were not prepared. None of the children were prepared for reality. My last three brothers probably were the most prepared. Myself, my brother Joseph, my sister Lynn, and Rose, we weren't prepared for shit. You know, it was all about my mother, all about my grandmother, but mainly all about my mother. My mother was not a nice person. At the end of the day, she just wasn't. She was more concerned with how much money she's going to make and taking all the money from us to take care of her own. That's just how she was. That's when she'd bring foster kids in. It was because money was being made there. When she had these people coming to the house for readings and seances. And there were other, it was all about the money. There were people, some of the foster siblings, Ruthie, Kathy, they all talk about my mother, how I have to use the word vicious in the way mother was. But c'est la vie, that's what it was. You know, I can't change it. I wish it had been different. She did prepare us to be able to function in crisis situation, but she didn't prepare us for real life. You know, if you go to church every day, you go to church 5 days a week, and you scream and jump up and down and roll around. I was always against it. I'm saying this doesn't make any sense. You go to church every day, or let's say 4 days a week. That's a lot. You're not going to get any more in going 4 days than you get one day. It's going to be exactly, at least to me, it's going to be exactly the same thing. And for me, the pastor that was at the church, when he killed himself in the church, shot himself in the head, that did it for me. I mean, because I really believed in this guy. Before I went in the service, his name was Elder Wagner. And then I found out when I'm over there that he shot himself in the church. And he was supposed to be a mentor for me. So why are you going to do something like that? So something's wrong with this picture. You know, people put a lot of stock in the church because it's easy. You know, I'm not an atheist, but I just don't subscribe to it. It's not, I don't see any, I just believe that things happen because they're supposed to happen or within a certain period of time, but that's just my belief. Well, when I got home, 65, I went to work at General Motors. And still singing, even on the job. I was on the line spraying the frames. And people used to hear me sing all the time. And they say, you know, man, there's another guy that works here. And he sings in a group. So his name was Punkin. And I went there, they say that they're looking for another singer. So I went and I met him, and he was working someplace down the line. And he said, man, we're going to have a rehearsal at such and such a time over here. And they weren't the Natural Four then. They were called, I think, the Dynamic Dimensions or something like that. So I went by, and they gave me an audition. You know, it was easy for me. I knew what I was doing. And that's when I got with Punkin, Johnny, Alan, and myself. And there was a couple of other guys that had tried out for the group, AJ and his brother. But they were not as serious as I was. Myself, Punkin, Johnny, and Alan, even they weren't as serious as I was. And it was during the time that, because we wanted to change the name, it was during the time that natural wigs were a big thing back in there, in the 60s. And Punkin didn't need a natural wig because he had a head full of hair. Alan had what they call good hair, coal black, really curly. And John January, he had a nice sized fro, but me and John, well, we sat down one day and said, okay, we're going to call ourselves the Natural Four. It's just one of those things because of the natural wigs, and it just stuck, was right on time. But it really came from us going to this wig shop and getting these natural wigs had a lot to do with us becoming the Natural Four. And this was in 68, 69, like that. The first single was in 1968, called I Thought You Were Mine. Oh, it was wonderful. For me, it was like natural. It was like it was supposed to be like this. You went to the studio, they cut the 45 right there in the studio after you finished doing it, and so for me, it was like there was nothing unusual. I got really interested in the recording part of it and what they were doing, how they were doing it, and that was truly the spark that started the fire myself as an engineer. You know, to watch, his name was Bob Vieira, and it was called Sierra Sounds on Ashby in Berkeley. I'll never forget the place. Well, we did and we didn't. Everybody was crooked. You know, again, I never made one dime singing. Not one, I have never made 10 cents on anything because we didn't write anything. Everybody else wrote it. We would always end up paying. When the money came from ABC Records, this clown Willie Hoskins took all the money and recorded the Whispers, the Ballads, the Hartfield Brothers. He recorded everybody else with the money that we got from I Thought You Were Mine, because 30,000 copies of a record in the Bay Area was big time back in the 60s. That was like, you know, we was on the radio with Sly Stone, was a DJ, Sly, Bob White, all these guys. They were, you know, playing the stuff all the time. We were, you know, we were somebody, just didn't make any money. Good Vibes was released in 1969. Maybe it might have been close to 70, but it was not 70. More so 1969. Because we did 68, I Thought You Were Mine. And then right after that, we signed with ABC. And it may have been late 69. But it wasn't quite 70. Not at all. These are the songs they wanted us to do. We did them. The last song, the song that, which is the song that I hate for the rest of my life, is the worst song that I've ever recorded. It was called Steppin' On Up. That is the most ugly song. We did that in 5 minutes. It was just a mess. It was just like we just threw it together, and it's a joke. We're just trying to find something to put on there, and we made it up ourselves, and I sound like a banshee screaming. It's one of those things I wish you could just take a thing and cut it off the record. It was horrible. I've been looking for it. I'm hoping and praying. I think one day, probably when I'm gone, it's going to show up. But we recorded that before the Whispers. But that was the song that got the Whispers the contract with Dick Griffey and Solar Records. I went to LA and I recorded my part. And I was with Steve Punkin, I think Delmas, myself, I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah, I'm almost positive. And it was it's one of those things where they wanted the Whispers to sign with Solar Records. And the way to get them to sign was to say, well, we're going to give the gig to the Natural Four, because we were all in the same town together. And that's the song that helped the Whispers. The difference between the Whispers and the Natural Four was we were better singers, but Nick was a better songwriter. He was a songwriter. They wrote most of their own stuff. They were smart enough to realize that was somewhere. I was with Punkin, who didn't care. He was selling drugs. And Alan, it was a hobby for him. John January was a hobby for him. And then Steve and Delmas, that was like the fiasco of my life. Mainly with Delmas, who's still in prison to this day. And he's not due to get out until 2028. And I'm glad. I have no respect for him. He was a thug, and he was a thief, and he was not a nice person, I didn't pick him, Willie Hoskins did. And he's been a thorn in my side the last half of my career because of Can This Be Real? Sometimes I wonder how I stayed in the business, but I left to sing, so I stayed in the business. '72 is when we got with Kurt Tom. Okay, there was a couple of years, year and a half, 2 years in there that we weren't doing too much of anything because the group was pretty much broken up. When Alan and John January, when they opted out because Alan's wife was the wife he was married to at the time was in a very serious accident, and so that was the end of it. And John January was with June, his wife, and they were having all kinds of problems. Punkin was having problems with his wife. The only person that wasn't saying anything was the woman that I was married to. Well, there was like a 2-year period in there, and I can't think of this guy's name. Oh man, what was his name? There was a gentleman that was kind of seeing my sister, and anyway, he heard us sing, and he was friends with Marvin Gaye at the time, and Kurt Tom Records and and he told Curtis about us. He said there's a group in Oakland, and you guys should hear him. So Marv Stewart, who was Curtis's partner back then, he came out because they were going to bring Curtis out to do a small tour. Stockton, San Jose, Sacramento, a small tour like that. And we ended up being like the opening act for Curtis. And at the time, Superfly was out, the movie. And we did Eddie You Should Know Better as a vocal group. Curtis heard it, told Marv, sign these guys up, and then the rest is history. It was around late 71, early 72 that this happened. And then right after that, they flew us to Chicago, and we signed an in perpetuity contract, which we didn't know any better, with Curtom through Marv Stewart. So no matter what the songs were tied to, we didn't write them, so it made no difference. No one sat us down and ever told us, look, if you don't write, you're not gonna make no money. And there was so much turmoil going on within the group, Delmus was always doing something screwed up, always. Cocaine was flying free. Everybody's walking around with these little bottles, around the neck, and that was the big thing. No one was focused, including myself, was focused on write some songs. It's like, and then years pass, and so that's the come natural for literally have never been a solid financial. I've always had to do things on the outside. I always had to have a job, a second, to supplement when we weren't gigging. Thank goodness I was smart enough to get my kids into commercials, because both Christopher and Mark, mainly Mark, really were the subsidy for my music through commercials, like one of the biggest commercials that Mark did. And it's all tied in because Mark was right there. The M&M's commercial, it paid off good money every 2-3 weeks. There's a nice check coming in the mail. I mean, nice check. And back then, that money was really, really good. So that's pretty much how, if I didn't have an 8-hour job, I had a few gigs here and there, but the gigs were not paying that much money, $700, $500. That's no money when you're paying bass, drums, guitar, keyboards, 4 singers. That's chump change, So I had to find ways to survive. So I always found some kind of a job that I could be on for a minute and then take off, which was usually retail. Now these are girls. That's the girls behind it. The photographer had his girlfriend take these pictures. This was in Oakland. You got to realize you're talking about the Bay Area, hippie town, but that's what those are. And this was at a club called the Nairobi Lounge. But this is all one of the young ladies behind, and her breasts too, but they kind of moved them out the way. Oh. Well, this one was for me. This is the straw that broke the camel's back with me with these guys, because we were supposed to go to do a shooting, and they had tickets for us to get on a regular plane. But because Steve and Delmus were out screwing around, they had to end up flying us to L.A. in a Piper Cub, those little bitty small planes. And that's when Warner Brothers dropped us, because we weren't there on time. We were going down, as a matter of fact, Larry Graham from Graham Central Station, we were all supposed to be going down at the same time. They got there on time, we didn't. And if you look at the picture on the back, oh no, it's on the front. If you look how I'm looking, I was pissed off. And it was like, this is it. And it was right after that I said, I'll bump these guys, I gotta go. Leroy Hudson and I don't really see eye to eye on a lot of things, because on Can This Be Real, he decided that Delmus was the best person to sing the song, which I could have done the same thing. So, and I knew that this song was going to help us do bigger things. But I knew that the wrong person was singing the lead. Delmus should not have ever sang the lead on this song, because it truly went to his head. Try Love Again was a really good group song because it showed the versatility of the group. But for Delmus to get the lead on this song, I was really pissed off because I really didn't want him to have the opportunity to get a song of this caliber, because I knew that Delmus, you know, he's a slob. He wasn't a nice person then, you know. So he's been in prison ever since. Well, not ever since, but for a long time. And he's not going to change. But Leroy apparently had different aspirations. You know, Delmus is a good singer, don't get me wrong. If he had been a different person, I wouldn't have minded so much. But because I could see him taking us on a downward a trend, which he did. You know, he's the reason that the group broke up. He really is. Now Steve's dead. Daryl doesn't sing anymore. I'm the only one still doing music. Oh, Lord. This was you like that song? Are you serious? I think this is one of the ugliest songs, another one of the ugliest songs I have ever recorded. I mean, there were a couple of them that, this is just, I don't know what to say about the song, I just didn't like it. It made no sense. They were trying to do, I think they were looking at, what's his name? He used to have a television show. Oh man, what was his name? I can't think of this guy's name. Dog. You were too young to know, but there was a TV show, and it was a black guy, a brother, I can't think of his name right now, but he had a television name. Anyway, if I think of it, I'll let you know. And when I do, you'll understand. If you get a chance, see if you can see it. Because his whole famous thing was, the devil made me do this. And, when I think of his name, I'll tell you. But that's where this song came from. They were trying to connect it and possibly get a shot on his television show. He was a black comedian. But it didn't happen. Oh, yeah. That was a great song. I mean, I give it to him. Delmus did a good job. He just was not the right guy at the right time. I could have done as well, but Leroy wanted Delmus, and that's what it is. Because they had the same kind of tonal voices, Delmus and Leroy. I've seen them all. I remember that one. Well, the story about this, Wilson Pickett was on the same show. And Wilson Pickett and Curtis got into a hassle. And Wilson Pickett started talking real crazy to Curtis. And so Curtis said, I'm not doing the show. And so we're back to saying, come on, we want to. So we ended up being, that was not supposed to be the only artist we have. It was not supposed to be just us that night. It was supposed to be Curtis, Wilson Pickett, I think, and us. And it was a big fiasco. And that was a midnight special. That was major. So we're like, please, don't, because I think we had on, does it show the picture of us, what we had on?
Yeah.
Let me see what that is.
That was, that's the only thing I have on that.
Okay. That was our first appearance on that show. And the outfits that we have on, the shirts, we had, because what we originally had on was complete white tuxedos. I think we had blue shirts on and the bow ties. They said, but back then, white on television was like, you couldn't do it. I mean, it was just too glaring. So we had to go across the street and get 4 of those shirts that we have on. We had to get those shirts from across the street. The pants were okay, but the shirts, the tops, our tuxedo tops were just too white. So we had, and those were, when I say cheap, those tops, they lasted through the song, and that was it. Then they started falling apart. Nobody saw this but us. But they were really, really super cheap. Oh, that's Heaven Right Here on Earth. That's one that Leroy did that, at least he allowed me to do that song. Oh, those were extremely expensive outfits back then. Each one of those cost $1,000. Now those outfits, the blue, we got those in Chicago. That was the Can This Be Real? We in terms of routines, we were really good, smooth dancers, and a lot of the choreography came from my son Mark. He was, this is before your time. They used to have a major commercial called "Who Can Take a Peanut?" Da-da-da-da-da. Well, Mark was the star of that commercial, but he was because he used to watch us all the time rehearse, and he would always help us come up with steps and routines. And he was a kid; he was like 8, 9 years old, but he could step really good. Don knew because we met him in Chicago. I liked him a lot. He was hard, but he was a nice person. We first did our first show at his club called the High Chaparral. But it was, I think it was called the High Chaparral, but that was when I first met him. Also, we got an opportunity to perform at a place, you ever hear of a place called Mr. Kelly's? Look it up. It used to be a really super high-class, non-black club, okay? That was one of the first, a few times that I experienced racism. We went to the club called Mr. Kelly's, and you had to know somebody to get into this club. They had people that you guys would never know, like Sandy Barron, or just these off-the-wall comedians that would perform there. And Marv Stewart got us a shot there. And to play at Mr. Kelly's, this is downtown Chicago. I realized after years that Chicago was a very racist city, really racist. And I didn't, my head was not there. Anyway, I'll never forget this experience. I think I put it in the book, but we went in to the club, and they told us you have to, you gotta be here on time, blah, blah, blah. And they didn't tell us that they didn't want us to come into the front door. So, we entertainers. Got our step, we go through the front door, and what did we do that for? They got on the phone, they called Marv and said, hey, and he used the N-word, just came through the front door, blah, 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 blah. So Marv called me and said, hey man, you guys can't go through the front door. I said, why? I'm from California, I don't know about no back door shit. I said, no, you can't go through the front door, you gotta go around through the serve entrance. I I said, okay, no problem. And so as we were there, we were going through our motions, these people were really rude to us. The waiters and waitresses, very, very rude. You know, I mean, we had everything we wanted. We had a nice dressing room, but they definitely didn't want us to fraternize with the customers, which were 90%, 95%, 98% white folks. They love to come to see the entertainment. And I'll never forget, you could hear him saying all this racist shit, get these ends out of here, these blah, 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 blah. I'm watching them, and they're coming through this door. The doors swing like this, You go in one, you come out one, You go in this one, you come out this one, or vice versa. So I started thinking, because when you're starting to hear all these ugly remarks, they have, my first thought was, we need to do something. So they'd come through and they'd have a tray of food to serve to the people. And one time they came through, especially these two waiters, why don't these so-and-sos get out the way? So I said, watch this. So it was me. I went down and they come and get ready and had a tray full of food. I put my foot in the door. And the food went all over the place. They didn't see who did it. And they couldn't, I can say it now because it was so long ago. I put my foot there, the trays went all over the customers on the floor. I shot back upstairs and they never knew who did it. They didn't even see how it happened. But what they were doing when it's coming out, you can hear all this ugly conversation. I said, I'll fix these motherfuckers. Stuck my foot right there. After that, things really went downhill fast. We were in Atlanta. We had done some other shows, and I was getting sicker and sicker. I had it's called a urethral stricture, where I couldn't urinate. And it was getting worse and worse. It was taking me like 30 minutes to go to the bathroom. And we were in Atlanta, and I had gotten the money to pay us because we had been stiffed in a gig prior to the one we were getting ready to do in Atlanta. And Delmas and I got into it in the hotel room. And I'm not a violent person at all. It's just not my nature, And so I'm there. I had somebody send me some money so I could pay everybody. And so I'm standing there. I got the money in my hand that I had somebody send me some money so we could pay everybody. And he's going to try to sucker punch me. You know what that is, right? I'm looking like this, and he's over here, and he misses. I said, that's it. And that was really this is in late 74, 75. I said, that's it. I'm not going through no changes with nobody. I'm getting money to pay us. So I picked the phone and called my brother CJ, the one that passed away. I said, hey man, because he's a real good driver. I said, I bought him a plane ticket. He flew down. Because we were traveling in my personal car, which was they don't have anymore. It's called a Granville. It was a Pontiac Granville, big car, nice seats. Really, it's not as big as a Cadillac, but it rode like a Cadillac. So CJ came down, and him and I drove back. Took us just 2 days to get back. And about maybe 2 to 3 weeks after that, I ended up in the hospital having the operation. And that was the end of the group. We tried, kind of, sort of. They tried to put something together, and I told them, I said, you guys, you're not going to be able to do it. I knew they wouldn't be able to do it because It was just the karmic thing. They had a couple of guys. One guy was alcoholic and like that. Yeah, I didn't even trip on it. They say, oh, you know, they're... And I took off and started working with my sons. I did several times. But it's not easy trying to get. I did with several different groups of people. I'll send you some clips of one segment of them. And then I had another segment. And then after a while, I'm saying, I don't want to do this shit anymore. I'd rather be by myself. I don't have anybody, you know, I tried for a minute. I tried really hard for a minute. I even had one of my brothers, Albert, and a friend of his. It just was not, you know, because people said you guys were there on Monday and Tuesday you were gone forever. And it was just like that because I gave them an opportunity to do it without me, but they couldn't do it. Delmus was not going to, he just was not going to let that happen because of just how he is. He's a criminal. You know, as I said, Steve passed away because he smoked too much. He passed away from emphysema. And Daryl went from this to this in weight, huge, you know. And I'm the only one that has continued to perform. Support the older artists. That really, that's the only thing I would say. Support groups like mine, like the Mad Lads, the Intruders, groups that, like myself, that just disappeared. You know, because we were the pioneers. We were the ones that really made a lot of things happen back then. You know, there was more than just the Temptations or the Four Tops or like that. You had secondary groups like mine, Natural Four, you know, Manhattans, the Dells. You had a lot of groups, you know, support that kind of music. I'm not into the new sounds that they have. It's just, the minute they went to synthesizers and drum machines, music changed drastically. And people have a tendency not to realize until you hear something like that. Sure, you hear the of the record, but you also hear real instruments. Support real music and real musicians. Come see my shows when I'm doing it. You know, you can get this book on Amazon.com, but you can see my story on SoulDisco.de.